right, fabulous. Well, we might just jump straight in since we've got Ian and Owen and Bettina here with us today at 9 p.m. UK time. We'll use this hour as best we can. So a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us so far to our LifeCourse Cohort Researchers Forum. This is a friendly space for anyone involved in cohort research to come together and to share tools, approaches, solutions that often cut across the different content areas that we're working within. My name is Meredith O'Connor and I'm a Senior Research Fellow and Program Lead for LifeCourse, and it's lovely to meet anyone who I haven't met before, though I think everyone's name looks pretty familiar in the participants list. Before we get going today, as always, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're joining from today, many different lands across Australia. In this virtual meeting, and pay respects to elders past and present, and particularly to any First Nations people who are joining us today. And in the context of thinking about our cohort data and cohort research, also just currently reflecting on that importance of Indigenous data sovereignty and the right of Indigenous people to govern the way that their data is used and collected. One of our core aims in LifeCourse is to facilitate cross-cohort research collaborations, and that coming together and joining forces across cohort studies. And that's because it opens the door to so many new research avenues that might not be possible within the constraints of any one study. For example, we've got Craig Olsen on the line, one of our scientific leads, who's leading the international intergenerational cohort consortium, which is bringing together these very rare 3-generation cohort studies across Australia and New Zealand, and allowing us to ask these questions, these intergenerational questions that wouldn't otherwise be possible within any one of those existing studies. So great value that can be gained from this type of approach, but anyone who's actually done it will know that there's a great deal of data wrangling involved when we try to bring these studies together. And I know the joys of sorrows of working with an Excel spreadsheet to try to align and match up those items or those measures that are available across different cohorts. So we're very, very grateful for Owen and Bettina joining us all the way from the UK today at a very late hour of the evening to share about an innovative new tool, the Harmony tool, that can help to make that process of aligning data elements much more efficient across our cohort studies, and leave us as researchers to spend our time in that more judgment aspect when we're undertaking that measure alignment. So I'll hand over to you, Owen and Bettina, and as usual, we'll have a presentation followed by time for discussion and Q&A at the end.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction, and it's very nice to be here. Thank you everyone for having us. I'm just going to share my screen, and then I hope everybody can see this. Yes, good. So Bettina Maltrecht and Owen, we are here today to talk with you about our Harmony tool. We have a small introduction just about the two of us. So I'm based at the Centre for Longitudinal Study, which is based at the University College London. And then if I'm not there, then I'm based at the Evidence-Based Practice Unit, which is a cross-collaboration between UCL and the Anna Freud Centre, which is a mental health charity in the UK. By background, I used to work as a clinical psychologist, and then sort of started doing research a couple of years ago, starting with mental health apps, and still sort of doing some clinical research. And at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, I'm doing sort of more epidemiology and the Harmony tool. And Owen, I'll let you do your part.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bettina. Hi, I'm Owen McElroy. I'm a lecturer in the School of Psychology at Ulster University, Northern Ireland. Yeah, I research broadly in child and adolescent mental health at the population level. So most of my work has involved different cohort studies. I'm also interested in things around kind of measurement and psychometrics. And yeah, myself and Bettina had worked on a large kind of UK collaboration during the COVID pandemic, and I previously done some harmonization work, and that's kind of where this project originated.
Yeah. So Owen used to be based at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies as well. So here's just some sort of information of the cohorts that we have. So they're all UK-based cohorts. Actually the first one we used to have is it's not showing here. It's actually the National Child Development Study. It's actually quite hidden. It's the National Study of Health and Development. So we always call it NSHD. So that was the first cohort that was sort of set up in the UK in 1946, right after the war. And then sort of we were very, very lucky in the UK that all of these other studies were kind of set up afterwards. So we had the National Child Development Study in 1958, the 1970s. Was the British cohort study, and then the more sort of younger ones is Next Steps and the Millennium Cohort Study, which started in 2000, 2001. And the other three that we see at the bottom are currently have just started or kind of are about to start or have their sort of feasibility testing done. So there's more data to come from these studies. And then we just sort of jump right into Harmony. Harmony is the data tool that we developed to help us make research using these cohorts a bit easier. And this is the Harmony team. So we are basically 5 researchers. So Owen and I, we're co-leading the Harmony tool project. And then we have Mauricio Hoffman from Brazil. He's our partner. And George Probides is a statistician at the CLS. And Thomas Wood is our industry partner and sort of AI expert on this project. And Harmony was developed basically with sort of mental health problems in mind. And we all, I guess, know that worldwide millions of people are basically held back by depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. And this number just keeps growing every year, especially since the pandemic. And that's why many researchers over the last decades have sort of tried to sort of collect data in different countries and different contexts with different people to help us understand why do mental health problems develop, what factors do we need to kind of target to sort of prevent or treat them. And lots of data is sort of all over the world in many different places, but currently we're not really using them in the best possible way. And most of this research is kind of like conducted in silos. So ideally, actually, if we could, we would be able to link them all because that would really help us to drive mental health research forward, because we could kind of compare different countries and contexts, but we could also have so that's what we did during the COVID-19 pandemic. We tried to bring more data across the UK together to get a better understanding of what's happening in the UK and to help us get bigger sample sizes so that we can sort of do a bit more complex analyses. So that would all be nice if we could do that. I think many researchers agree that that is a nice thing to do, but somehow we are not really doing that yet. And why aren't we doing that yet? So one issue is data sharing and data linkage can be a problem. So basically, different studies have often been set up in a different way, and they may have not sort of thought about when they were set up, how we can actually bring these different data together across organizations. So there are some sort of organizations that currently try to tackle that or provide some solutions. So in the UK, we have something called Open Safely. They have lots of our electronic health record data. It's a very smart sort of technological setup whereby nobody can actually see the underlying data. You basically get some sort of dummy data when you analyze it, and you don't really sort of see the actual data. And then the other one we have is the UK longitudinal linkage collaboration. That's very new. They basically now help us to link our cohort data to electronic health records or sort of admin data. And I'm sure there's something similar like that in Australia as well. Now, knowing what's out there can also be very difficult. So for a researcher to just know what studies or data sets are even out there can be quite challenging. Again, there are many teams that have been trying to find a solution for this. Again, in the UK, we have Louise Arsenault's catalogue of mental health measures. So she has tried to really kind of take all the longitudinal studies that we have in the UK and sort of really sort of itemized all the questionnaires that we have to help research or mental health researchers understand what data we have available. Then in the UK, we have the UK Data Service. They have a lot of data. They are the biggest data depository that we have in the UK, very similar to the Australian Data Archive. So you have, again, some very similar structures set up. And then you probably are familiar with your own work as well here, sort of trying to sort of highlight the measures that you have in your cohorts. So again, across the world, we see really, really good efforts about how to help researchers discover this data and access it. But then we have another problem, and that is, especially when it comes to mental health measures, we know that just for depression alone, there have been more than 200 questionnaires that all try to measure the same thing, but yet they use slightly sort of different items or questions. And they have, some of them might have 20 items, some of them might only have 9. And there's really kind of, how do we then take the different studies with the different measures and actually compare them? So here's just like an example. These are 2 anxiety questionnaires. So I just highlighted a few that are similar. So we have on the left side is the GAD-7, where it says trouble relaxing. So that is somewhat comparable to the other side, to being unable to relax. So this is kind of like how we currently try to sort of figure out how similar are these questionnaires actually that have been used across different studies. So this is an overview of the cohorts we have at CLS. And it just sort of shows different questionnaires that have been used in different cohorts and at different ages. And you can see just between sort of the first sort of couple of years, we already have 8 different questionnaires. Then also coming from different reporters, from parents, from teachers. So sometimes the questions can be slightly different. So you can see that it's not only within a cohort that questionnaires can change for mental health, but it can also be across cohorts, so they change within cohorts or within a time, basically, because people obviously sort of develop, and you would ask a child of 5 years a different question than a 15-year-old sort of adolescent. But we have the same, again, I'm using your examples. You have lots of nice studies as well, and you've done a lot of work on this as well, just to highlight all the different questionnaires that you have also in your cohort studies. So to come back to the original problem, what do we do with these different measures in all of these studies? And one way to kind of like deal with this is retrospective measurement harmonization. And I'm just going to give you an example of what this could look like. So let's say we wanted to compare mental health outcomes for adolescents between 2 studies, and we're just taking the Millennium Cohort study in the UK and the Brazil high-risk cohort study in Brazil, because we've done this with our partners in Brazil. So if you're new to this process, what you normally do is you have a look at the metadata. So all the study information that you can get from the different studies. So this can be Excel sheets, this can be PDFs, pages and pages. So the one on the right, you might not be able to see it, but it has more than 300 pages. So researchers who want to know what's common across 2 studies might have to go through all of these pages and sort of documentation to figure out, oh, which items or questionnaires are actually similar and have they been asked at a similar age and all of these things. And then it now actually takes months almost to just go through all of these pages to get a rough idea of what is actually common across these two studies. So here we have MCS and Brazil. For this research question, we were really interested in sort of social factors. So we knew there was something around family in each cohort. There was something about friends, but again, that was just a high level sort of idea of the concepts that we had in both studies. And then you basically go again into all the different sort of metadata and items and figure out how comparable are they. And then we end up with the Excel sheet that Meredith sort of mentioned earlier. So we basically have what we did here. We have on the left side, we have the Brazil items plus how they were originally, so what response options they had. So how did people reply to these questions? Did they say often or only sometimes, never? And then on the right-hand side, we have what we found in the Millennium Cohort studies. And basically you then sort of go through and you check with multiple people how comparable you think that is and how you can recode the items to make the data comparable across the studies. So this can take months. And then another challenge is what if you actually then also want to study mental health across different countries? Well, you might then have a problem that you don't speak many languages or all the languages that you would like to speak. And that's another barrier to kind of accessing studies that might not have been assessed or been translated in your language, or in research is often English. So is there a solution for all of these problems? Well, that's why we invented Harmony, and I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of how Harmony works. Can you see the Harmony tool? Yes, good. So this is the Harmony tool, what it currently looks like. So we have just a normal sort of website. We have it also available as an art package, but this kind of visual sort of representation often works better for people. So you just sort of type in harmonydata.ac.uk, and then you should get to this place. Now, users can upload their metadata. So if they have a questionnaire or something, the study that they're interested in either PDF or Excel sheets or text format. So I'm just going to use an example. So just these two again from Brazil and MCS. And you can also add your own questionnaire if you want to. So let's say I put in test, test, and something like I like ice cream. So you can enter whatever sort of questionnaires or metadata you want to compare, basically. And then you can click on Harmonize, and Harmony will basically use natural language processing to automatically kind of tell you what it has in common. Now, I already told you that Harmony does sort of do things across languages. So my Portuguese is not very good, but basically this is, you can see that it would say that the two items in the Brazil and in the UK sort of cohort would sort of say the same sort of items and how comparable they are. On the left-hand side, we have these different thresholds. So we have it from 100 to 0. Let's say you only wanted to know items that have a very low similarity. Then you kind of just move this sort of threshold along, depending on what you want to see. And another feature that we have, if you were looking, for instance, for something very specific. So let's say I want to see if there's sort of gender in my data set. Then I can see that in Brazil, it has gender, and in MCS, it's sort of sex is in there as well. So it helps you to quite quickly sort of figure out what your studies have in common. And it does sort of, so Harmony matches everything with everything. So that's why you also see the other items here. Now, with this score in the middle, I should have probably said that from the get-go, that's our sort of similarity score. So the higher this score is, the greater the similarity between the items, so the more sort of comparable they are. And then we have, let's see if I find one. I think siblings might be somewhere in here. Let's try. Oh yeah, so if they're really not sort of related, then you can see it's kind of like goes into like a red sort of zone. And yeah, you don't really have much of an overlap. Sometimes you can see a high number and a minus, and then you have something like it's like sort of antonyms in your sentences, for instance, so the opposite. So they might still be related, but it's not the same. And then another thing is, because often some of these data sets can have quite a few matches, we have this function that you can just select certain matches. So we haven't selected one, but so let's say I just select these three because I want them in my analysis. So then I can select this, and I say I only want this for my research. Another thing that we started to do, so one of the sort of platforms that I mentioned earlier that try to help researchers find mental health studies is the mental health catalogue, or that was developed in the UK with UK studies. So we have linked Harmony with this catalogue. And based on this, so because the two platforms speak to each other, Harmony knows that the items we've uploaded are kind of related to behavior problems and emotional problems. So people who are familiar with the STQ, they'll probably sort of know about that. So, but basically what happens here is you can then search for studies in the catalogue. So these are, again, all UK studies that have measured these concepts that basically Harmony detected here by you sort of uploading the items. And then you can also sort of report if something doesn't work. So let's say you think something is not quite right. You can sort of report it that it doesn't quite add up. And then once you're done, once you've sort of selected all the items that you want to export, you can sort of use the export button and sort of save that on your laptop, and then you can sort of figure out which items you think are most comparable. And I'll leave the questions for later on if anybody has a question about the interface. And then we continue with how Harmony actually works.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So yeah, so how does Harmony work? How do we know that it will produce valid matches? Well, I'll start with what's going on kind of underneath the hood. So Harmony matches items by their semantic content using natural language processing. So this is essentially a similar large language model, to ChatGPT and all of these things that news writes very scary articles about. And basically the way it works, it's a transformer model that converts words into numeric vectors. So again, neither myself nor Bettina are kind of AI specialists. Our colleague Thomas Wood, our industry partner, has been leading on this, and he's tried to explain these models to us in language that someone like myself with kind of rudimentary statistics can understand. But essentially the way it works is it breaks sentences down into words and assigns values to those words, or turns words into these kind of tokens. These tokens are then placed into kind of vector space. Obviously, synonyms that are kind of similar will be placed closer together in this kind of high dimensional space. And then the model uses a sentence transformer or a neural network to combine all of the vectors from an entire sentence into one. Then it calculates the distance between those two vectors, which is known as the cosine similarity score, and that's the kind of the numeric value we have in there. So again, my sort of way of visualizing this or thinking about this is almost, you know, if there was some way to kind of plot these things in two-dimensional space and almost fit two regression lines to them, and looking at kind of the difference in the angles between those lines. Again, that's probably butchering the proper interpretation, but it makes sense in my head. Yeah, next slide there, Bettina. So how do we know that this is actually any good? Well, when we were developing Harmony, we tested 10 different natural language processing models to see how well they could reproduce basically some matches between questions that were done by humans. So for this, our data came from a project I was involved with a couple of years ago when I was a postdoc, again, as Bettina mentioned, at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies. And those cohort studies that Bettina mentioned, one of the projects I was involved with was looking at all of the mental health measures that were in there. Again, we kind of saw that Excel file, and kind of going through each one of those by hand, picking out similar symptoms or similar questions and trying to draw up this almost schematic of where were individual questions overlapping. So basically doing what Harmony's doing, but doing it by kind of hand, as it were, to try and introduce try and make this as systematic as possible. How we did it is we sort of took an inter-rater reliability approach. Basically, I went through all of these questions item by item, assigned each one with a code that I felt reflected kind of the core symptom that was being assessed. A colleague, Mark Tibber, in the Department of Clinical Psychology at UCL, he did the same thing independently of me, and then we kind of compared our results, did some inter-rater reliability. We found we agreed about 80% of the time. And when we didn't agree, we had a third colleague, Pascal Fearon, who's head of the clinical psychology team at the time. He served as kind of the decision maker. And from this, we mapped out this kind of large schematic of matching symptoms. So basically, that was our kind of data for this the kind of initial validation we did of the tool. We then essentially tested these 10 different models to see would they basically come to the same agreement as we had done by hand. And we found the best performing model was something called the sentence BERT model. Again, it's kind of like an open source equivalent to GPT. And again, we found it kind of aligned with what our matches about 80% of the time. So that was our kind of very early kind of validation work. Other validation work that we did, we wanted to expand on this a little bit. So one of the ways we kind of thought about testing this was seeing how well Harmony, you know, when we're dealing with these pairs of questionnaire items, what does the kind of concordance between two pairs of items in Harmony, how does that compare with kind of real world empirical correlations? The idea being that if people are saying or reporting pairs of symptoms in a similar way, that they should probably be, you know, semantically similar. So how did we test this? We got access to some, again, open source data. This was collected in the UK during the COVID-19 pandemic, a kind of large epidemiological survey of common mental health problems during the tail end of the pandemic. This is from, I think, the 6th sweep of that data set. And what was interesting about this data set, and why it was very well suited to validating Harmony, was it was also being used to trial a couple of new measures of depression and anxiety. So it had, within this overall sample, they had administered 2 measures of depression, 2 measures of anxiety, and some other measures, things like trauma-related questions, schizotypy, lots of other things. But the kind of the older, the not necessarily old, but the more commonly used measures of depression and anxiety, the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, and these newly developed International Depression Questionnaire and International Anxiety Questionnaire. These were developed to more closely align with the latest edition of the ICD, the ICD-11, kind of maps directly onto them. So in theory, this was a good data set to test because we have multiple measures of depression and anxiety. There should be quite a lot of overlap here in terms of kind of semantic content. Okay, so what we did, as we said, Harmony compares everything with everything when you feed it in there. So we kind of broke this data set down into kind of item pairs. So we had 5 different questionnaires in there, and 39 individual questions. This gave us 741 permutations of items. So the first thing we did is we took this kind of matrix of items, fed it into Harmony, which produced a cosine similarity score for every pair of items. We then looked at the actual empirical data and calculated a Spearman correlation for every pair of items. And from this, we created this new data set where basically the cases represented the item pairs, and we had an empirical correlation and a cosine score for each pair of items. We then correlated those 2 indices. I think we can go on. Yep. And what we found was a pretty moderate to strong correlation between the two. We found a correlation coefficient of this time it was a Spearman, or sorry, a Pearson correlation, 0.48. We then looked at this a little bit further. Go to the next slide, Bettina. So we wanted to see what was the accuracy with which we could predict the correlation coefficients based on our cosine scores. So we randomly divided the sample. We took we kind of did a training and testing approach to this. We took 80% of the sample, so randomly picked 80% of the item, the 741 item pairs, and tested a simple linear regression model. And then we tested that in the 20% holdout sample. And basically what we found, again, the cosine scores were a significant predictor of real-world correlations. We tested the mean absolute error. So in other words, we found that in our holdout sample, if we knew the cosine score of a pair of items, we could predict the actual correlation between those 2 items with an average kind of error of plus or minus 0.05 points of a Pearson correlation. So again, a quite an accurate prediction of the actual correlation. We also tried to test this to see could we uncover slightly more complex structures, almost like we're trying to produce something like a factor analysis without any actual empirical data. So we in order to do this, we ran some network models. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the kind of network psychometric literature. It was quite popular over the last 10 or 15 years in mental health. Basically fed these correlation matrices into R and ran some clustering algorithms to see could we pick out kind of densely connected nodes, or that would be kind of analogous to factors in a factor analysis. What we found was that compared to the kind of bivariate correlations, we were able to pick out a little bit of clustering, but it was still not a particularly strong solution. And in the right there, what we have is a network of kind of partial correlations. So, you know, looking at the associations, accounting for everything else in the network. And that picked out obviously quite strong clusters of connected nodes. Now, our cosine network produced by Harmony wasn't able to quite replicate that level of clustering in the data. So kind of take home message from this validation study, what did we find? Again, we found a moderate to strong correlation between cosine and the correlation coefficients. The cosine score was able to predict real world correlations with I think what you could argue is an almost remarkable level of error. It was really quite accurate. However, it struggled to kind of tease apart these more complicated structures in the data, you know, things like latent factors. That can be found if anybody's interested as a preprint. It's currently under review at the moment. So yeah, so I guess just finishing up with some discussion of kind of what the future holds for Harmony. So going forward, one of the big aims is to work more closely with other similar initiatives. We've already talked about Louise Arsenault's catalogue of mental health measures. We're hoping we're also working with the UK LLC, the UK Data Service, and we're hoping to make Harmony not just a tool for harmonization itself, but also a kind of hub to try and bring these different initiatives together. We have developed other collaborations. One of the first collaborations we developed, are one of the first people to find Harmony and try to build it into what they do, was the Australian Data Archive. So we were contacted by student Eve Cheng, who's a student at Australian National University and also works at Data Archive. So she's been working with Thomas and forking the code and using it for her own research, which is really good to see. We're also looking to do, kind of maybe a bit more deeper dive into what the harmonization and translation process means. That, okay, we can use this tool to kind of match data, or it's quite it doesn't matter what language you're putting in there, and the tool itself will match things up regardless of language. But does that mean that things are being harmonized perfectly, or could certain cultural meanings and things like that be lost along the way? So we're putting together, we're trying to organize a kind of expert panel consultation to try and explore that in more detail. And we're also looking to do more just general development of the tool itself, the interface, and also more validation work. So again, we're just in the process of starting a new study where we're trying to get a large group of volunteers to kind of do the manual harmonization process themselves, and again see how Harmony kind of aligns with that process. So that's just some of the stuff we've got in the pipeline. Bettina, have I missed anything there, or anything else that's
No, I think that was were the main sort of, yeah, we're just sort of always happy to kind of like collaborate, and all of it is, so there's also a link to GitHub, so all of it is sort of freely available, and our tech team is also trying to always help whoever wants to connect to Harmony. We kind of think the more the better, because currently everything is just sort of scattered around, and it would be nice to just sort of have a more more connection between all the different platforms and to bring them together. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alan and Bettina. I think it's a great service you've done to research worldwide who can put us, get back those 15 hours that they might have spent otherwise doing that first cut of looking at those harmonization opportunities. Just that element of low value work where we can put this researcher time to much more much better tasks that really require that judgment aspect. I think what also struck me from your presentation, I thought was so interesting, Owen, because it's something we don't often reflect on, and maybe it's a bit invisible in our papers, but I thought that was really interesting that you mentioned that even when undertaking that harmonization process through a manual approach, it was only about an 80% agreement. So that's something that's often kind of missing, invisible from the work that we do, and sort of suggesting that there is a need for more systematic, more transparent, perhaps, processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that absolutely is one of the key kind of reasons we developed this tool. Is yes, saving time is useful, but also just giving some kind of transparency or reproducibility to the process, because yeah, again, it's when you're confronted with a large spreadsheet of items, particularly again, mental health items, because there is this level of subjectivity to certain symptoms, and it was an interesting process, particularly given my colleague who I did the kind of inter-rater agreement with. My background's more kind of bigger data epidemiology, whereas he was a clinician, and sometimes he would come up with things and I'd be like, oh, that's not how I would have interpreted that phrasing at all, and that's kind of I think where a lot of the disagreements came from. So yeah, just having a tool to try, and again, it's just a tool to help researchers. There will always be a need for people to make decisions and use their own kind of judgment with this, but yeah, just hopefully it helps people along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it opens up more capacity for the researcher to spend that time on nutting through those tricky elements, rather than all that time that's needed to identify that two items are exactly the same.
Yeah, and we would encourage sort of researchers when they use Harmony that they, put like a table with the cosine sort of scores into their supplements or something, so that it is, like people who come afterwards sort of can understand, how was this decision made, or, so often people ask for thresholds, what is a good cosine score? What's this, where should I, so we haven't established thresholds at this point. So that's basically what we're trying to do with the next study. But then again, I often think, so we had very interestingly, so I think Harmony works quite well, but I think with everything AI, we shouldn't just sort of let it go. Sort of, there's still some sort of, human judgment sort of needed. Owen had a very good sort of example the other day where he had two items related to irritability, and one was kind of saying had temper tantrums or something, and the other one was sort of something easily flies off the handle or something.
Flying off the handle, yeah.
Yes.
And they weren't. It really didn't match them up at all, because it probably took the fly and handle entirely literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some reason for caution every now and then. So you do still want to, double check some of it, but it hopefully just speeds it up and it makes it more transparent. And the other thing is, if you do ever use it and you feel like, oh, something in this isn't not quite right, we only really developed this around 1.5 years ago, so it's still very young. So if you ever do see something that's not quite right, it's just sort of let us know. We do have sort of an issue tracker where you can raise things as well. But it's yeah, it's, you know, nothing is perfect in technology, so it's just sort of but the more feedback we get, the better we can make it, basically. Yeah.
Fabulous.